What if I told you that for 18 years, a little girl lived in a hidden prison, just steps away from neighbors who had no idea she existed? What if I told you that this prison had no bars, no chains visible to the outside world, and yet it held her captive more effectively than any maximum security facility ever could? And what if I told you that her escape came not from a daring rescue mission, but from a moment so ordinary, so seemingly insignificant, that the monsters who held her never saw it coming? This is the story of Jaycee Dugard, a story that will make you question everything you think you know about safety, about community, about the invisible horrors that can exist right next door. And I need you to stay with me until the very end, because the twist in this tale, the moment when everything changes, will leave you breathless. Before we dive deeper into this darkness, I need to ask you something. If this story moves you, if it makes you think, if it makes you feel something real, then please share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel right now, because stories like these need to be told, and the only way we can keep telling them is with your support. Do it now, before you forget, because by the end of this journey, you'll be too absorbed in Jaycee's world to remember. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. South Lake Tahoe, California. June 10th, 1991. The morning sun was just beginning to warm the mountain air, casting long golden shadows across the quiet streets of this small community. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, where children played in the streets until the streetlights came on, where everyone knew everyone, and danger was something that happened somewhere else, to someone else. Jaycee Dugard was 11 years old. She had blonde hair, blue eyes, and a smile that could light up any room. She was in 5th grade, loved animals, and had recently started taking an interest in fashion magazines. She was, by every measure, an ordinary girl living an ordinary life in an ordinary town. That morning, Jaycee woke up early. Her stepfather, Carl Probin, was already preparing for work. Her mother, Terry, was getting ready for her own day. Jaycee had missed the school bus the day before, and she was determined not to let it happen again. She grabbed her backpack, said goodbye to her family, and stepped out into the California sunshine. The bus stop was about a quarter-mile from her home, up a small hill on a quiet road. Jaycee began her walk, her mind probably wandering to the day ahead, to her friends, to the mundane concerns of an 11-year-old girl. She had no way of knowing that she would never reach that bus stop. She had no way of knowing that the next 18 years of her life were about to be stolen from her. Carl Probin was in the garage when he heard the commotion. He looked up just in time to see a gray sedan, a Ford Pinto, approach his stepdaughter as she walked up the hill. He watched as the car slowed. He watched as someone reached out from the passenger window. He watched as Jaycee was grabbed, pulled into the vehicle, and driven away. It happened in seconds. No time to react. No time to process. No time to save her. Carl ran toward the street, but the car was already disappearing around a corner. He jumped on his bike and gave chase, pedaling as fast as his legs could carry him, his heart pounding, his mind racing. But the gray sedan was faster. It vanished into the morning, taking Jaycee with it, leaving behind only the echo of a nightmare that had just begun. The police were called immediately. Carl's account was detailed and desperate. He described the car, the direction it traveled, the horrifying moment when his stepdaughter was snatched from the street in broad daylight. Search parties were organized. Helicopters circled overhead. Dogs were brought in to track Jaycee's scent. The entire community mobilized, driven by shock and disbelief that such a thing could happen in their peaceful town. But there was nothing. No leads. No witnesses. No trace of the gray sedan or the little girl with the blonde hair and the blue eyes. In those first hours, hope was still alive. Surely someone would see something. Surely the kidnappers would make a mistake. Surely Jaycee would be found before nightfall, scared but safe, returned to the arms of her terrified family. But nightfall came, and Jaycee did not. The investigation expanded. The FBI was brought in. Jaycee's face was plastered on missing person posters across the state, then across the country. Her image appeared on milk cartons, in newspapers, on television screens. The nation watched and waited, praying for a miracle that seemed increasingly unlikely with each passing day. Terry Dugard, Jaycee's mother, refused to give up. She became a tireless advocate for her daughter, appearing on talk shows, organizing search efforts, keeping Jaycee's name in the public consciousness. She celebrated every birthday with a cake and candles, refusing to accept that her daughter might never come home. She kept Jaycee's room exactly as it was, a shrine to hope in a world that offered her little reason to hold on to it. But as days turned to weeks, and weeks turned to months, the leads dried up. The media attention faded. The search parties disbanded. Life in South Lake Tahoe slowly returned to normal, even as one family's world remained shattered. What nobody knew, what nobody could have imagined, was that Jaycee was still alive. She was less than 200 miles away, hidden in a backyard compound that would become her prison for the next 18 years. She was in the hands of a monster named Phillip Garrido and his wife, Nancy, and the horrors she would endure in that compound would defy comprehension. This is where our story truly begins. Not with the kidnapping, as horrific as it was, but with what came after. With the years of captivity, the psychological manipulation, the unimaginable resilience of a little girl who refused to be broken. And ultimately, with the twist of fate that would bring her home. Stay with me. This journey is just beginning. The gray sedan carried Jaycee east, away from the mountains of Lake Tahoe, away from everything she had ever known. In the passenger seat, Nancy Garrido held the terrified girl, having deployed a stun gun to subdue her during the abduction. In the driver's seat, Phillip Garrido drove calmly, methodically, as if kidnapping a child was the most natural thing in the world. For Jaycee, time had stopped making sense. One moment she was walking to school, thinking about ordinary things. The next, she was in pain, confused, being held by strangers in a strange car driving to a strange destination. Her mind could not process what was happening. This was not real. This could not be real. But it was real, and it was only the beginning. The car eventually arrived at a property in Antioch, California, a quiet residential neighborhood about 170 miles from where Jaycee had been taken. From the street, the Garrido house looked unremarkable, a modest single-story home with a fenced backyard. Neighbors knew Phillip Garrido as the strange man who lived with his wife, a little odd perhaps, but harmless enough. They had no idea what lay behind that fence. The backyard of the Garrido property was a maze of sheds, tents, and tarps. Tall fences and dense foliage hid it from view. It was a compound within a compound, a hidden world where Phillip Garrido had already decided Jaycee would live. He had prepared for this. He had planned for this. This was not an impulsive crime. It was premeditated evil. Jaycee was taken to a soundproofed shed in the back of the property. The door was locked behind her. And just like that, her old life was over. In those first hours and days, Jaycee experienced shock and terror beyond anything she could have imagined. She was alone, in the dark, with no understanding of where she was or what was going to happen to her. She called out for her mother. She cried. She prayed. She waited for rescue that did not come. Phillip Garrido was a registered sex offender, already convicted and paroled for a previous kidnapping and rape. The system had failed. It would continue to fail for 18 years. The psychological manipulation began almost immediately. Garrido told Jaycee that her family had stopped looking for her. He told her that no one cared about her anymore. He told her that he was her family now, and that if she tried to escape, terrible things would happen. He created a reality where he was her only source of food, shelter, and human contact. He made himself indispensable to her survival. This is a technique used by abusers throughout history. Isolation, dependency, and the systematic destruction of the victim's sense of self. Jaycee was not physically chained for most of her captivity. She did not need to be. The chains were psychological, and they were far more effective than any metal restraint. Jaycee was subjected to repeated sexual assault. She was 11 years old when it began. There are no words that can adequately describe the horror of what she endured. There are no phrases that can capture the theft of innocence, the destruction of childhood, the daily trauma that became her existence. And yet, somehow, Jaycee survived. She developed what psychologists call adaptive coping mechanisms. She created mental spaces where she could retreat from the horror. She held on to memories of her mother, her sister, her old life. She told herself stories, imagined rescue scenarios, dreamed of the day when she would be free. She did whatever she had to do to make it through each day, each hour, each moment. The world outside continued to search for her, though the search grew quieter with each passing year. Her mother never stopped hoping, never stopped advocating, never stopped believing that her daughter was alive somewhere. But leads went nowhere. Investigations hit dead ends. Jaycee Dugard became one of America's cold cases, a face on a poster that people walked past without seeing. Meanwhile, in the backyard compound, time moved differently. Seasons changed. Years passed. Jaycee grew from a child into a teenager, then into a woman, all within the confines of her hidden prison. She had never been to high school. She had never experienced a first date, a prom, a graduation. She had never celebrated a birthday with friends her own age. These experiences were stolen from her, and she could never get them back. At 14, Jaycee became pregnant with her captor's child. At 15, she gave birth to a daughter in the backyard compound, with no medical assistance, no pain medication, nothing but the help of her captors. She named her daughter Angel. 3 years later, she gave birth again. Another daughter. Another child born into captivity. Another life that began in the shadows of that hidden world. Jaycee's daughters never knew any other existence. They grew up believing that the backyard compound was normal, that Phillip Garrido was their father, that the outside world was a dangerous place where they did not belong. They never attended school. They never had friends. They never experienced the ordinary joys and challenges of childhood. And yet, within the darkness of their circumstances, Jaycee created light. She loved her daughters fiercely. She taught them to read and write. She told them stories about the world beyond the fence, stories that she half remembered from her own interrupted childhood. She gave them as much normalcy as she could, even as their reality was anything but normal. Here is a question I want you to think about, and I truly want to know your answer. What do you think gave Jaycee the strength to survive 18 years in captivity? Was it hope? Was it her daughters? Was it something else entirely? Leave a comment below and tell me what you believe, because your perspective matters, and this conversation needs to continue. Jaycee's survival was a testament to human resilience, but it was also an indictment of the systems that should have protected her. Phillip Garrido was a registered sex offender on parole. He was supposed to be monitored. Parole officers visited his property over 60 times during Jaycee's captivity. 60 times. And not once did they discover the compound in the backyard. Not once did they find the woman and children hidden behind the fences and the tarps. How is this possible? How can a convicted sex offender hide kidnapping victims on his property for nearly 2 decades while authorities visit regularly? These are questions that demand answers, and the answers are deeply troubling. The years in captivity blended together for Jaycee, a continuous stream of survival punctuated by moments of both despair and unexpected grace. She watched her daughters grow, teaching them everything she could about the world she barely remembered. She read books when Garrido allowed them. She wrote in journals, documenting her thoughts and dreams in words that she hoped someone might someday read. Phillip Garrido was a man of contradictions that made him even more disturbing. He saw himself as a religious figure, a chosen prophet with a special connection to God. He believed that angels spoke to him, that he had supernatural powers, that his crimes were somehow justified by divine purpose. He created a church in the backyard, held services for an audience of captives, and preached sermons about salvation while committing acts of unspeakable evil. This combination of religious delusion and predatory behavior is not uncommon among certain types of offenders. They create elaborate justifications for their actions, convincing themselves that they are special, that normal rules do not apply to them, that their victims should be grateful for the attention. It is a sickness that masquerades as faith, and it is deeply dangerous. Nancy Garrido was complicit in everything. She had helped kidnap Jaycee. She knew about the assaults. She was present for the births of both daughters. She participated in maintaining the prison that the backyard had become. Whatever her reasons, whatever psychological factors contributed to her involvement, she was not an innocent bystander. She was an active participant in 18 years of crimes. The relationship between Jaycee and her captors was complicated by the psychological dynamics of long-term captivity. This is sometimes called Stockholm Syndrome, though experts debate whether that term accurately captures what happens in these situations. What is clear is that survival often requires victims to form some kind of relationship with their captors, to find ways to humanize them, to predict their moods and behaviors in order to stay safe. Jaycee became expert at reading Garrido's emotional states. She knew when he was calm and when he was dangerous. She knew how to de-escalate situations, how to avoid triggers, how to make herself and her daughters as safe as possible within an inherently unsafe environment. These were not signs of acceptance or affection. They were survival skills, honed over years of captivity, necessary for staying alive. During these years, Jaycee never stopped thinking about her mother. She wondered if Terry was still looking for her. She wondered if her family had given up. She wondered if they would recognize her if they saw her now, changed as she was by time and trauma. These thoughts kept her connected to her old identity, to the girl she had been before June 10, 1991. She also never stopped hoping for rescue, even as that hope grew more complicated with time. Escape was theoretically possible, especially in the later years when her movements within the compound became less restricted. But by then, she had daughters to think about. Garrido had made it clear that any attempt to escape would result in terrible consequences for all of them. The risk was too great. The uncertainty was too overwhelming. And so Jaycee stayed, trapped not by physical barriers but by fear, by responsibility, by the impossible calculus of protecting children born into captivity. The outside world changed dramatically during Jaycee's 18 years of captivity. Technology advanced. The internet became ubiquitous. Social media emerged. The ways that people communicated, worked, and lived were transformed. Jaycee knew almost nothing of these changes. Her world remained frozen in 1991, with only glimpses of modernity filtered through her captors. Terry Dugard continued her advocacy, appearing on television shows, working with missing children organizations, refusing to let Jaycee's case fade from public memory. She remarried and divorced. She moved through the stages of grief and hope and despair that mark the experience of families with missing loved ones. But she never stopped believing that her daughter was alive somewhere. She never stopped waiting for the phone call that would bring her baby home. The investigation into Jaycee's disappearance remained officially open but practically dormant. New technologies like DNA databases and facial recognition software were developed, but there was no new evidence to apply them to. The gray sedan had never been found. Phillip and Nancy Garrido were never considered suspects. The case was cold, seemingly unsolvable, another tragedy lost to time. But fate has a way of intervening when least expected. The twist that would finally bring Jaycee home began not with detective work or investigative breakthroughs, but with Phillip Garrido's own arrogance and delusion. In 2009, Garrido became increasingly interested in promoting his religious ideas to the outside world. He believed that his message was important enough to share with a wider audience. He began looking for opportunities to spread his teachings, completely unaware that this impulse would be his undoing. Garrido approached the University of California, Berkeley, seeking permission to hold a special event on campus. He wanted to distribute religious materials and speak about his beliefs. He brought 2 young girls with him, girls who behaved strangely, who seemed uncomfortable in public settings, who triggered the instincts of a campus security officer named Lisa Campbell. Campbell was immediately suspicious. Something about the interaction felt wrong. The man was odd, clearly, but it was the girls who concerned her most. They were pale, as if they rarely saw sunlight. They were socially awkward, unfamiliar with basic interactions. They looked at the world as if seeing it for the first time. After Garrido left, Campbell did something that would change everything. She ran his name through the system and discovered that he was a registered sex offender on parole. She immediately contacted his parole officer, sharing her concerns about the strange man and the even stranger girls he had brought to campus. This was the moment. After 18 years, after 60-plus visits to the Garrido property, after countless missed opportunities, this was the moment when everything began to unravel. Phillip Garrido's parole officer received the call from Lisa Campbell and did something that should have been done years earlier. He took the concern seriously. He asked questions. He demanded answers. When confronted about the girls he had brought to Berkeley, Garrido initially lied. He claimed they were the children of relatives. But the story did not hold up under scrutiny. The parole officer pressed harder. Who were these children? Where did they come from? Why did a registered sex offender have young girls in his care? On August 26, 2009, Garrido was ordered to report to the parole office with the children and their mother. This was the moment when Jaycee Dugard's 18-year captivity would finally come to an end. Garrido arrived at the office with Nancy, with the two teenage girls, and with a woman he introduced as Alyssa. Alyssa was nervous, quiet, deferential to her captors. She answered questions carefully, clearly afraid of saying the wrong thing. But as the interview continued, as the parole officers asked more detailed questions, the facade began to crack. Jaycee later described this moment as terrifying and liberating in equal measure. She had spent 18 years in captivity, her identity systematically erased, her connection to her previous life severed. She had been taught that the outside world was dangerous, that authorities could not be trusted, that any attempt to reveal her true identity would result in catastrophe. But she also knew, somewhere deep inside, that this was her chance. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for, dreaming about, hoping for during all those years in the backyard compound. If she told the truth now, everything would change. The investigators separated Jaycee from her captors and continued questioning. They sensed that something was deeply wrong. This woman, Alyssa, was hiding something. The children were hiding something. The entire situation felt like a layer cake of lies, each one concealing something more disturbing underneath. Finally, after hours of questioning, Jaycee made a decision. She looked at the investigators and spoke the words that would set her free. "My name is Jaycee Dugard." The room went silent. The investigators stared at her in disbelief. Jaycee Dugard, the name from the milk cartons, the face from the missing posters, the cold case that had haunted California for 18 years. She was alive. She was here. She was telling them who she was. In that moment, the world shifted on its axis. Calls were made. Authorities scrambled. Phillip and Nancy Garrido were immediately taken into custody. The backyard compound was secured as a crime scene. And somewhere, a phone rang, bringing news to a mother who had never stopped hoping. Terry Dugard received the call that she had been waiting 18 years to receive. Her daughter was alive. Her daughter was safe. Her daughter was coming home. The emotion of that moment defies description. 18 years of grief, of hope, of uncertainty, of desperate advocacy, all culminating in a single phone call. Jaycee was alive. The nightmare was over. But of course, it was not over. It was never going to be that simple. 18 years of captivity cannot be erased by a single revelation, no matter how miraculous. Jaycee was free, but she was also profoundly damaged. She had to learn how to live in a world that had moved on without her, how to reconnect with a family she barely remembered, how to process trauma that most people cannot even comprehend. The reunion between Jaycee and her mother took place at a police station, surrounded by officials and investigators. It was not the joyful embrace that movies would have us imagine. It was awkward, tentative, emotionally overwhelming. Terry looked at her daughter, now a grown woman with children of her own, and tried to reconcile this stranger with the 11-year-old girl who had disappeared on a morning walk to the bus stop. Jaycee looked at her mother and saw someone she loved, someone she had thought about every day of her captivity, but also someone she no longer really knew. 18 years is a long time. People change. Relationships that were once central become distant memories. The bond between mother and daughter was still there, but it needed to be rebuilt from the ground up. Jaycee's daughters, now 11 and 15 years old, faced their own overwhelming challenges. They had never known any life outside the backyard compound. They had never attended school, never had friends their own age, never experienced the ordinary rhythms of childhood. The outside world was alien to them, frightening and overwhelming in its complexity. The transition from captivity to freedom is rarely portrayed accurately in media. It is not a moment of pure joy followed by happily ever after. It is a process, often painful, frequently frustrating, marked by setbacks and breakthroughs in equal measure. Jaycee and her daughters had to learn how to be free, and that learning would take years. The investigation into the Garrido compound revealed the full extent of the horror that had taken place there. Evidence of 18 years of crimes was collected and documented. The makeshift structures where Jaycee and her daughters had lived were photographed and analyzed. Neighbors were interviewed, most of them shocked to learn what had been happening literally in their backyard. Some neighbors had suspected something was wrong. They had seen children in the yard who seemed to appear from nowhere. They had heard noises at odd hours. They had noticed the elaborate fencing and the strange comings and goings. But none of them had called the police. None of them had investigated further. The Garridos' secret had remained hidden, protected by suburban indifference and the assumption that terrible things happened somewhere else. This is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Jaycee's case. She was not hidden in some remote location, miles from civilization. She was in a residential neighborhood, surrounded by families, within shouting distance of people who might have saved her. The system failed her. The community failed her. Everyone failed her. The legal proceedings against Phillip and Nancy Garrido moved forward with a swiftness that surprised many observers. The evidence was overwhelming. The crimes were undeniable. The only question was how severely the justice system would punish 18 years of kidnapping, rape, and false imprisonment. Phillip Garrido was charged with 29 felony counts, including kidnapping, rape, and false imprisonment. Nancy Garrido faced similar charges. Both pleaded guilty in April 2011, sparing Jaycee and her daughters the trauma of testifying at trial. During his guilty plea, Phillip Garrido addressed the court. His statement was rambling, delusional, and infuriating. He expressed what he called deep remorse, but his words revealed a man who still did not fully understand the magnitude of his crimes. He spoke of turning his life around, of the power of transformation, as if his actions could somehow be reframed as a narrative of personal growth. Jaycee was present in the courtroom. She listened to her captor's words and felt a complex mix of emotions. Anger, certainly. Disgust. But also something that surprised her. Strength. She was no longer the helpless victim, the captive in the backyard. She was a survivor, facing her abuser in a court of law, watching justice finally being served. Phillip Garrido was sentenced to 431 years to life in prison. Nancy Garrido received 36 years to life. Neither would ever be eligible for parole. Neither would ever breathe free air again. The monsters who had stolen 18 years of Jaycee's life would spend the rest of their lives behind bars. After the sentencing, Jaycee read a statement to the press. Her words were measured, thoughtful, and unexpectedly powerful. She spoke of the long road ahead, of the healing that still needed to happen, of her hope for the future. She did not define herself as a victim. She defined herself as a survivor. I chose not to be a victim, Jaycee said. I chose to be a survivor. These words became a kind of mantra for Jaycee as she navigated the years that followed. Survival was not just about enduring captivity. It was about building a new life, creating new memories, finding joy in a world that had once seemed lost to her forever. The Jaycee Dugard case prompted immediate changes in the California parole system. Investigations revealed systemic failures that had allowed Garrido to maintain his compound undetected for nearly 2 decades. Parole officers had visited the property regularly, but had never inspected the backyard. Neighbors had reported concerns, but had not been taken seriously. Technology that could have detected the hidden structures had not been used. In response, California implemented new protocols for monitoring sex offenders. Parole officers were required to conduct more thorough inspections. GPS monitoring was expanded. Communication between law enforcement agencies was improved. The failures that had allowed Jaycee's captivity to continue were addressed. though they could never undo the damage that had already been done. Jaycee received a settlement from the state of California, compensation for the systemic failures that had prolonged her captivity. $20 million, an acknowledgement that the state had failed in its duty to protect her. The money would never be enough, could never be enough, but it provided Jaycee with the resources to build a new life on her own terms. She used some of the settlement to create the Jaycee Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping families recovering from abduction and other traumatic experiences. The foundation provides resources, support, and advocacy for those who have experienced what Jaycee experienced. It is a way of transforming personal tragedy into positive change, of ensuring that something good can come from something terrible. Jaycee also wrote a memoir, A Stolen Life, published in 2011. The book became a bestseller, connecting with readers who were moved by her story and inspired by her resilience. Writing the memoir was part of Jaycee's healing process, a way of reclaiming her narrative from those who had tried to control it. The words were hers. The story was hers. The survival was hers. In the book, Jaycee described her captivity with remarkable clarity and courage. She did not flinch from the darkness, but she also did not wallow in it. She wrote about the moments of hope, the small victories, the love she felt for her daughters. She wrote about the human capacity for resilience, for adaptation, for finding light in the deepest darkness. Readers responded to Jaycee's story with overwhelming emotion. Letters poured in from survivors of abuse, from families of missing children, from ordinary people who were moved by her strength. Jaycee had become a symbol of survival, proof that even the most horrific experiences could be overcome. But Jaycee was careful not to let that symbol overshadow her humanity. She was not just an inspiration or a cautionary tale. She was a woman, a mother, a daughter, a person with ordinary hopes and dreams and struggles. She wanted to live a normal life, whatever that meant for someone whose childhood had been stolen. The years following Jaycee's rescue were marked by both remarkable progress and ongoing challenges. Recovery from long-term captivity is not a linear process. There are good days and bad days, breakthroughs and setbacks, moments of joy and moments of overwhelming grief. Jaycee and her daughters, Angel and Starlet, worked with therapists who specialized in trauma recovery. They learned coping mechanisms, processed their experiences, and slowly began to build the skills they needed to function in a world that was still strange to them. It was difficult, often painful, but they did the work. Jaycee's relationship with her mother deepened over time. The initial awkwardness of their reunion gave way to genuine reconnection. Jaycee Dugard had never stopped loving her daughter, had never stopped hoping for her return, and that love provided a foundation for rebuilding their relationship. They had lost 18 years, but they were determined not to lose any more. Jaycee also reconnected with her younger half-sister, Shayna, who had been a toddler when Jaycee was kidnapped. Shayna had grown up in the shadow of her sister's disappearance, aware of the family's pain, but too young to fully understand it. Now the two sisters had the chance to know each other as adults, to build a relationship that should have developed during childhood. The Dugard family expanded in unexpected ways. Jaycee's daughters, raised in isolation, now had grandparents, aunts, cousins, an extended family that welcomed them with open arms. The transition was not always smooth. There were misunderstandings, cultural differences, moments of friction. But there was also love, unconditional and healing. Jaycee continued her advocacy work through the Jaycee Foundation. She spoke at conferences, met with legislators, worked to improve systems for protecting children and supporting survivors. Her voice carried weight because of her experience, and she used that weight to push for meaningful change. She was particularly focused on the importance of community awareness. One of the most disturbing aspects of her captivity was how easily it had remained hidden. Neighbors had suspected something was wrong, but had not acted. If even one person had investigated further, had called the police, had insisted on answers, Jaycee's captivity might have ended years earlier. If you see something, say something, Jaycee urged. Trust your instincts. Don't assume someone else will handle it. One phone call could save a life. This message resonated with audiences across the country. Jaycee's story became a catalyst for conversations about community responsibility, about the importance of vigilance, about the role that ordinary people can play in protecting the vulnerable. Jaycee also emphasized the importance of hope for families of missing children. During her captivity, she had held on to the belief that her mother was still looking for her, still fighting for her return. That belief had helped sustain her through the darkest moments. She urged families to never give up, to keep searching, to maintain hope even when hope seemed impossible. Your loved one might be waiting for you, Jaycee said. They might be holding on to the hope that you haven't given up. Don't prove them wrong. The public response to Jaycee's advocacy was overwhelmingly positive. She received awards and recognition for her work. She was invited to speak at prestigious events. She was praised for her courage, her resilience, her commitment to helping others. But Jaycee remained grounded. She did not let the attention go to her head. She remembered where she had come from, the backyard compound, the years of darkness. She knew that her platform came at a terrible cost, and she was determined to use it responsibly. Her daughters continued to grow and develop, slowly adapting to a world they had never known. They attended school for the first time, learned to make friends, discovered interests and talents that had been suppressed during their years of captivity. They were not defined by their past. They were creating their own futures. Jaycee watched her daughters flourish with a mixture of pride and grief. Pride in their resilience, in their ability to overcome the circumstances of their birth and early childhood. Grief for the years that had been stolen, for the ordinary experiences they had never had, for the innocence that had been taken from them. But the grief was not the dominant emotion. What dominated was love. Love for her daughters, love for her mother, love for the life she was building. Love had sustained Jaycee through 18 years of captivity, and love would sustain her through the years of recovery. As the years passed, Jaycee's story began to fade from the headlines. New tragedies captured public attention. New missing children cases dominated the news cycle. The world moved on, as it always does. But Jaycee did not fade. She continued her quiet work of recovery and advocacy, building a life that was hers alone. She established routines, developed friendships, pursued interests that had been impossible during her captivity. She learned to drive. She traveled. She experienced the ordinary pleasures of adult life that most people take for granted. Her memoir, A Stolen Life, continued to reach new readers, its message of resilience resonating with each new generation. Jaycee published a second book, Freedom, My Book of Firsts, in 2016. This book focused on her recovery, on the experience of learning to live in freedom after so many years of captivity. It was hopeful, sometimes funny, deeply human. Jaycee wrote about experiencing the ocean for the first time, feeling the sand between her toes and the salt spray on her face. She wrote about eating sushi, about going to a movie theater, about the simple joy of walking outside whenever she wanted. These small experiences, ordinary to most people, were extraordinary to someone who had been denied them for nearly 2 decades. The book was well received, praised for its honesty and its celebration of life's small pleasures. Readers connected with Jaycee's wonder at the world, her appreciation for things that others might overlook. She reminded people not to take their freedom for granted, not to sleepwalk through the experiences that make life worth living. Jaycee's advocacy work continued to evolve. The Jaycee Foundation expanded its programs, reaching more families, providing more resources. Jaycee collaborated with law enforcement agencies, helping to train officers in trauma-informed approaches to working with victims. She testified before legislative bodies, pushing for stronger protections for children and survivors. She also became an advocate for changes in how the media covers cases of abduction and captivity. Too often, she argued, coverage focuses on the sensational details of the crime rather than the humanity of the victim. Too often, survivors are defined by what was done to them rather than who they are. I am not my worst experience, Jaycee said. I am so much more than that. And so is every survivor. This message of reclaiming identity resonated with survivors of all kinds of trauma. Jaycee's story was about kidnapping and captivity, but her message was universal. Anyone who has experienced something terrible can choose how to define themselves going forward. The past does not have to determine the future. Jaycee's relationship with her mother remained strong. Terry Dugard had been her daughter's fiercest advocate during the years of captivity, and she remained a constant source of support during the years of recovery. Mother and daughter had rebuilt their relationship, creating new memories to add to the ones that had been interrupted. Terry published her own book, What Did I Do Wrong?, about her experience as the mother of a kidnapped child. The book provided a different perspective on Jaycee's story, exploring the guilt, the grief, the desperate hope that had marked Terry's 18 years of waiting. It was a companion piece to Jaycee's memoirs, completing the picture of a family torn apart and put back together. Jaycee's daughters grew into young women, each finding her own path. They had overcome circumstances that would have broken many people, and they had emerged strong, capable, and resilient. Jaycee watched them with wonder and gratitude, marveling at the people they had become. The family was not perfect. No family is. There were arguments, misunderstandings, moments of frustration. But there was also love, deep and unconditional. They had survived the unsurvivable, and that survival had forged bonds that could not be broken. Today, Jaycee Lee Dugard is alive. She is free. She is thriving. She lives quietly, protecting her privacy and that of her daughters. She continues her advocacy work, but she has also learned to set boundaries, to take care of herself, to prioritize her own healing alongside her work to help others. She is no longer defined by June 10, 1991. She is not defined by the gray sedan, by the backyard compound, by the 18 years that were stolen from her. She is defined by her strength, her love, her resilience, her determination to live a full and meaningful life. Phillip Garrido remains in prison, where he will die. Nancy Garrido remains in prison, where she will likely die as well. The monsters have been caged. Justice, imperfect but real, has been served. The systems that failed Jaycee have been reformed. Parole procedures have been improved. Community awareness has increased. The lessons of her captivity have been learned, at least partially, by a society that prefers to believe such things cannot happen in its midst. But the most important legacy of Jaycee's story is not the policy changes or the institutional reforms. It is the proof that survival is possible. It is the demonstration that even the darkest captivity cannot extinguish the human spirit. It is the reminder that hope, however fragile, can sustain us through unimaginable suffering. Jaycee was 11 years old when she was kidnapped. She was 29 when she was rescued. 18 years, nearly half her life at that point, were stolen from her. And yet she chose not to be a victim. She chose to be a survivor. She chose to reclaim her life, her identity, her future. That choice, made and remade every day, is the heart of her story. It is not a passive acceptance of what happened. It is an active decision to move forward, to find joy, to create meaning. It is a victory that no one can take away from her. When I started this story, I asked you what could be hidden in plain sight for 18 years. Now you know. A little girl, then a woman, then a mother, hidden in a backyard compound just miles from where she was taken. Neighbors walked past. Parole officers visited. The world went on. And Jaycee survived. Her survival is not just her story. It is our story. It is a reminder of what humans are capable of, both the evil and the resilience. It is a call to vigilance, to community, to the belief that we can protect each other from the monsters among us. Jaycee Dugard was a victim. Jaycee Dugard is a survivor. And Jaycee Dugard's story is not over. It continues every day, in her quiet life, in her advocacy work, in the love she shares with her family. The ending is not written. The story goes on. And that, perhaps, is the most miraculous thing of all. After everything that was taken from her, after the years of darkness and isolation, after the trauma that would have destroyed most people, Jaycee Lee Dugard is still here. Still fighting. Still living. Still hoping. She won. Against all odds. Against the monsters who tried to break her. Against a system that failed her. Against years of captivity that should have been unsurvivable. She won. And that is how her story ends. Not with a period, but with a continuation. Not with a conclusion, but with a beginning. Jaycee Dugard is alive. She is free. She is loved. She is loving. She is, at last, home.